Hey team, Richard Tubb here with another episode of TubbTalk, the podcast for managed service providers. Now, it's probably fair to say that when it comes to sales, most MSPs love the results, the income, but they hate the process. The selling feels a bit icky, doesn't it? So, what does it take to make sales into a comfortable, easily repeatable process for IT businesses? In the world of cybersecurity demands as well, how do you help win new clients without scaring the living wits out of your prospects along the way? Today's guest is Kristian Walker of Huntress, one of the world's top cybersecurity companies, and a man who has been making waves, sharing some great advice for MSP sales through his online videos. I'm really thrilled for today's conversation. Kristian, welcome to TubbTalk.
Thanks so much for having me, Richard. Great to be here.
My pleasure. We were just talking just before we came on air, actually, about the videos that you're doing and putting out there, which have been received really well, and the courage I was saying that it takes to actually put yourself out there and to do that. So before we jump in, if anybody's not checked out Kristian's videos, LinkedIn is a good place to go and check them out. He's doing some great work. But how does it feel to put yourself out there, Kristian?
At first, I've put it off for years, Richard. I've always thought maybe I should. And to be honest, there was a bit of imposter syndrome. I thought, who cares what I've got to say, really, to a point.
Yeah.
But I just took the plunge one day and I got really positive feedback. I got a lot of support internally at Huntress as well. It feels good to scratch that itch, really, put myself out there a little bit.
Yeah. Let's rewind a little bit. For those who don't know you yet, haven't perhaps seen your videos or come across the work that you've done, can you share a bit about your journey into the IT industry and specifically how did you come to join Huntress?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I've been in sales in the IT industry now for over 10 years. I started out in systems integration, so selling PCs and real kind of hardware stuff, and then moved into a little bit of distribution along the way. And through the pandemic, actually, I was made redundant from that role. And it was a tough time because some companies were exponentially growing, some were petrified and were shrinking their staff down. I actually started to do what any salesperson would do in that situation, Richard, which was to pick up the phone and start calling people and looking for work. And I called through to a good friend, Jenny Hoffman, who at the time was working for me, a completely alien company that was selling software, right? They didn't do i3 processors and 4 gig of RAM. They sold something that you couldn't quite quantify. When I spoke to Jenny, I was looking for some pointers and she said, we're hiring. And that's how I ended up in the MSP community working for
Yeah.
a company called Datto. And then fast forward 4 or 5 years later, I couldn't quite ignore what Huntress was doing in the community. And a lot of MSPs feel the same way. I certainly did as a salesperson, and it was a really attractive proposition to interview for that role and to eventually work here at Huntress. And I've got to say, I'm not disappointed, Richard.
Yeah, it's an amazing company. We've had a number of people from Huntress on the podcast, and people
Yeah.
ask me, they say, you speak so highly of Huntress. And I'm like, yeah, they're really making waves, great company doing good things. And I know specifically here in the UK and Europe, Nick O'Donovan is putting together an incredible team. And I've watched from the outside in as not just Huntress, but Nick and the European team have just grown and grown and grown, all the while maintaining that great reputation. People speak very highly of what Huntress do within the community and that. So it's wonderful to see. I guess question for you. We've had people from Huntress on, they've mostly been on the technical side because I'm a geek and I love speaking to fellow cybersecurity people about these things. You're on the account exec, the executive, the sales side of things. What does a typical day look like for you then?
I've probably got the best job, really, Richard, because it's my job to introduce Huntress to people for the first time. So, an account executive can mean a lot of different things. That's one of the kind of mystifying things about sales is we're never just called salesperson. We have a role. My job is new business. So I bring on new partners and introduce them to Huntress for maybe the first time. So my day is stacked out with Zoom calls, much like this one, so we can have conversations and introduce the products, how we do things, really lead through that community feel as well, and maybe get them to try the product for the first time and sample what it's like. And really, for me, Richard, it's about understanding the MSP, right? We talk a lot about MSPs and we will do in this conversation, but everyone is so vastly different from the next
Sure.
one. So really understanding that piece is ultimately my role and maybe where Huntress might fit into how they operate at this moment in
Yeah.
time.
That must be a real thrill. I know I've done this for a long time now, and actually, you end up in a little bit of an echo chamber having conversations with the same people, the same faces, the same names, and that. And what I find really exciting is when somebody new to the industry, or perhaps has been in the industry but not aware of like my work or the work of people like Carl Palachuk or GTIA, or they've never come across all of these different things. And it's really cool then when they just see, oh my goodness, there's this whole thing
Yeah,
available. So it must be a thrill for you to speak to MSPs who are just not aware of Huntress previously,
yeah.
because as we've alluded to, you're doing some really cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a great reputation. And as you say, the community first outreach of Huntress is really where we meet the most prospective partners, or certainly partners. It's a really exciting part of the ecosystem to be in introducing that model.
Let's talk about sales. As I alluded to in the introduction here, and speaking as a former MSP myself, I know that sales was incredibly challenging back in the day. I'm a techie geek, and like a lot of people watching or listening to this show, perhaps started the business as like a technician. Before they knew it, they were a business owner, and then you've got to go and do sales. And it all feels a bit icky because all we want to do is get on with helping people, essentially,
Yeah.
fixing stuff and doing things like that. Why do you think MSPs, in your experience in the industry, why do MSPs find sales so challenging, and how do you help them reframe it?
It's really easy to generalize here, Richard, but I think your story there is very repeatable throughout the whole
Yeah.
MSP industry, right? So many people start off as a techie or a geek, as you say, and then move
I
into
say that in the
business owner.
nicest possible sense,
Yeah,
by the
no,
way.
I
So,
do
yeah.
as well. Absolutely. But I guess the reason why it's so difficult is, or icky, is because they've not done it before, right?
Mm,
And although there's no kind of degree that you can get from university or qualification that you can get in sales, it doesn't mean that you can't learn some techniques and some talk tracks and discussion processes to go through. And if you've never, like anything, if you've never done it before, of course it's going to feel maybe unnatural for you. It's
yeah.
human nature that people don't like change. And on that sales side, as soon as you start to proudly say you're a salesperson or you start to move into that space, there's a stigma and a reputation against salespeople that maybe they're
Agree.
untrustworthy, or they're trying to hoodwink you or Jedi mind trick you into something that you perhaps don't
We think of
need
a
or want.
used car salesman is the obvious stereotype that people think
Yeah,
a little bit slimy, a little bit
yeah,
manipulative, that sort of thing. Yeah.
absolutely. But ultimately, sales is about solving any problem and understanding what the problem is that maybe you can fix. At Huntress, we have a number of products, 4 different products here. And ultimately, all of those 4 products solve different problems that MSPs may face, or certainly MSP clients may face.
Yeah.
So as soon as you start to move away from how many do you want, or how many can I sell to you, and pricing and products, etc., and you move into solving problems, I think that becomes a different talk track, especially for geeks and MSP kind of tech guys that are problem solvers by their very nature.
Yeah. People, I mentioned it earlier, I got into this industry like so many people. I enjoy helping people. And so for me, when I was selling or going out to clients, I flipped the switch a little bit or reframed it by realizing that if I was in a position to help people, that's what I want to do. Rather than this traditional approach to sales, or when I say traditional, the stereotypical approach to sales, which is, oh, I'm going to try and persuade people they need to buy what I'm selling. I never took that approach. Is that something similar to your outlook on it?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a really interesting word when it comes to sales, and that's to convince somebody.
Yeah.
And often when you say convincing somebody, it's almost, as I say, a dirty kind of manipulative word associated to that. But I convinced my wife to marry me, and there was no manipulation in that.
We
And
hope
that's the
not. We hope not.
no,
No.
definitely not. And if there is, I think it says more about the individual than maybe the process they go through. But I think opening someone's mind to the possibility that maybe the product or the service that you sell is actually going to make their life a lot easier, or they're
Yeah.
going to profit from it in some way, or it's maybe the future or the answer. I think that's definitely the way to look at it, Richard.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. Here's something I've been thinking about. I speak to so many MSPs and they talk about, oh, clients are looking for value. How do you flip from being this stereotypical IT support person crawling under desks, fitting cables, fixing PCs and stuff, to being this value-driven consultant, somebody who's delivering genuine business value. Because there is that, I know from experience, that's what SMB clients want. Support is a necessity, but actually helping them to grow their business and delivering value, that is something they really want.
Yeah, I think, especially if you're looking at this as an MSP owner's perspective, or someone that's used to be on the coal face potentially, but is maybe taking a step back, that step back needs to be further, it needs to be faster, and it needs to be more strategic in terms of a vision for your clients rather than being on the coal face, on the tools, essentially, in fixing under desks and cable management and so on. And I think if you can start to have more consultative conversations with your client base about where they want to get to and how your MSP can be part of that, or the vehicle that can help them get there, then I think that's when you start to become taken more seriously as a trusted advisor.
Yeah.
I speak to MSPs a lot about giving clients advice and it falling on deaf ears often. And it baffles me a bit, Richard, because I don't think I've ever ignored advice from a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor.
Yeah.
Whereas when you start to look at the advice from an IT service desk, when you're paying from them for that advice and that service, often it is ignored or just declined.
Yeah.
And I wonder often why that's the case, whether it's because it is gone about in terms of a new shiny product on the market and we're trying to upsell at that moment to add a few quid to the service contract, or whether it's done in a way to have a strategic, structured conversation about the business as a whole and what their targets are over the short, medium, and long term.
Yeah.
It still baffles me, that whole concept, though, that IT advice is ignored by the very people you pay for IT advice for.
That's a
Yes.
brilliant analogy because, as you say, I don't think I would ever, if I went to my doctors and the doctor said, oh, okay, whatever ailment you've got, I'm going to prescribe you this. And you wouldn't sit there going, oh, you're only trying to sell me pharmaceutical industry stuff. And
Yeah.
yet, MSPs do get that sort of stigma attached to them a little bit. Unless you say a solicitor, if they gave you advice, you wouldn't go, what's in it for you? Yeah, it's all about having those broader conversations, isn't it? To let the client know, hey, I'm in this to help you grow. And if that means there's a product or solution that's going to help you grow, so be it. But that's it's a complete step change, isn't it? I think from
100%.
where MSPs, IT people have been seen in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the MSP maybe needs to drive that where they can. Obviously, there's some clients I get that it's really difficult to do that. But by stepping into that more business-minded, long-term strategic advisor, really in that IT space, every business, I would argue, is a technology business now. My
Oh,
wife
100%.
has a dance school, Richard, and everything is automated in terms of invoicing and the schedule, etc., and messages home. It's all technology first, really.
Yeah.
And I think if my wife's dance school is, and every business must be, but we need to find some point of advice and strategy, and maybe a trusted advisor is probably the best phraseology I could find in that
Yeah.
IT space. And an MSP is absolutely perfectly placed to do that.
Yeah.
Just depends on how they maybe go about that. It's really tough to stick a kind of fork in the ground and say it's done this way.
Let's you speak to hundreds, perhaps thousands, even tens of thousands of MSPs every year at Huntress. It's a company that's just growing and growing. You have conversations with MSPs around their sales and that. In your opinion, or in your experience, what's one of the biggest mistakes that MSPs make when it comes to sales? Do you see something that comes up again and again?
Yeah, I do. And a part of that is owner-led sales. I
Okay.
think as soon as that owner can maybe, obviously it's different with every business. Salespeople cost money, and obviously budgets can be tight at times. But if I always think if I was owning a business and I was running the whole thing from cradle to grave, the last thing I would have time to do is sell cybersecurity solutions, for example,
Mm,
or run workshops on why this problem should be solved, why it exists in the first place, and really educate that client in the first place as to what maybe issues exist and how they can be solved with software or computing systems, etc. So I think a focus on sales in the first place, Richard, and having someone dedicated to do that, even if it's only part-time, is going to
okay.
take someone much further as an MSP than I was talking to a managing director just last week, and we were talking about some of our solutions, how they were going to take them to market. And the managing director suggested that she would be the person that facilitate that and lead that. Now, I think she's just far too busy being a managing director of an MSP
Yeah.
to go to market and start selling software for a few quid a user, for example. We looked at different ways of doing that and different strategies to take this to market for that particular MSP. We looked actually at things like opt-out campaigns, or actually just mandating this cybersecurity piece of software to the clients, because scaling through 90 customers as a managing director is, I would argue, impossible.
Mm.
Some would argue at best unlikely. So there's other ways of taking things to market without picking up the phone and speaking to every individual client about things. But I'd always lead as a salesperson, obviously. I would always lead with the sales first approach and having someone dedicated to do that.
That's really interesting to me because I hear the argument from people that the owner of the business is the most passionate about the
Mm,
vision and things and getting out there. But you make a really strong argument for like most MSPs that I know in our SMB space. Let's just say typically they've got between sort of 40, 60 clients. You just mentioned an MSP there with sort of 90 clients. That's a lot of conversations to have, isn't it? So you need to
absolutely.
find another way to get those messages out there. Is there any value in educating the engineers within the team to take the lead on these conversations as well? Or do you feel
Yeah.
that they should be separate things?
Absolutely, I think so. I think if, especially in managed service providers, tend to be small and medium businesses themselves. And in that space, people need to, by their very nature, wear multiple hats. And I might be contradicting myself a little bit there, Richard, right? But I think if an engineer is responding to a support ticket about a specific problem, and maybe a new product that our MSP can provide that would solve that problem in the future, I think that's absolutely the time to have that conversation from the engineer's side. And then we can maybe discuss that with other members of the business on the sales, or in that case, the managing director side, to have those discussions. But yeah,
Yeah.
introducing that in the first place. Half of the problem, as you'll well know, is introducing the end client, your customer as an MSP, that the problem even exists in the
Yes.
first place. And although we've seen a lot in the news recently, and it's terrible to see the likes of Marks and Spencers and Jaguar Land Rover being hit by cyber attacks, the only positive you can take from that as somebody who works in cybersecurity is people are now aware of that type of issue. And that
Yeah.
awareness is often the most difficult thing to create as an MSP in the first place. If you've never been hacked, the last thing you're going to think about is, I need to make sure I'm not getting hacked. Because how many times do you have conversations about backup, for example, after you've lost your data?
Yeah, when the horse has bolted, yeah,
Exactly.
closing the barn door there. You've been on the receiving end as well. I know your history within the industry. You've been on the receiving end of being sold to. So, what's some of the maybe more interesting things that you've picked up as being a recipient of the sales patter, for want of a better word, the MSPs could actually learn from?
I could even spin that question round onto you, Richard, as an
Yeah.
MSP owner, and
Yeah.
how you've liked to think is a stretch, but how it's been the most convenient for you to be sold to. I think you've really got to. My advice to anyone selling to, or being sold to, or selling, is to disqualify as quickly as possible.
Got it.
And I think a lot of people try and sit there with happy ears waiting for reasons why this customer will buy your products. And I think actually, as a natural pessimist myself, if you flip those tables and say, why would they not buy this product? And you look to be completely open with that customer. And as a customer myself in those circumstances, you feel a lot more heard in those instances, because
Mm.
to any salesperson, I still stand by this after 10 years, your first response is always no. And then you'll build from there as to whether you want to look into this in more detail, etc. Educating, giving people time to research your product in more detail. One of the great things we do at Huntress is we enroll prospective clients that maybe have never used Huntress into what we call neighborhood watch program.
Yeah,
And
great program that is. Yeah.
yeah, and
Explain for our listeners what Neighborhood Watch is.
so Neighborhood Watch is basically a not for resale, internal use only way of utilizing our products and services. And so many MSPs I speak to say, we want to use it ourselves first and get comfortable with the product and so on. So we just give it to them and allow them to do exactly that and get comfortable with the product and learn at their own pace, right? There's a lot of different things going on a day-to-day basis. But Neighborhood Watch program will enable someone to get familiar, do their own research as techs and geekies. They want to
Absolutely.
play with
Yeah.
it until they can try and break it. And I think that's one way in which we allow the client, the customer, the partner to go on their own journey through that
Mm.
potential sales cycle as well.
Yeah.
So I think the answer to your question, Richard, is about really knowing your customer and trying to qualify out as much as qualify in.
Yeah, I love that. And I've got to say, Neighborhood Watch, we've talked about it on the show before. A brilliant lesson in branding there. I've got to say, my great friend, your colleague Tracy Arisco over in Canada, when she first told me about the Huntress Neighborhood Watch program, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. So lots of vendors have NFR, not for resale, but it's, oh yeah, you can take a look at it. But if they branded it up as something, here's the
Yeah,
neighborhood thing suggests community in the first instance, isn't it? So I think that's
yeah.
wonderful. And so many things Huntress do that's really well put together and really well explained to people as well. Great program for anybody watching this or listening to this. Go and check it out because it's a great way to get introduced to the Huntress ecosystem. I'm interested as well. Obviously, you've had so many conversations with MSPs. It must be clear to anybody who's watching or listening to this interview why you are absolutely rocking it within the Huntress ecosystem. You're a very likable person. You put the customer first. But when you speak to MSPs, what do they actually want from vendors when they're being pitched to? And the flip side of that coin, Kristian, what turns MSPs off when they're speaking to vendors?
Oh, I think if you're speaking to a vendor who's trying to push you through a sales cycle and kind of get you to meet deadlines and throwing in products that maybe you weren't talking about in the first place, I think that's a really fast way of losing some trust in that conversation.
Mm,
I think really listening to, we always start with an hour call and we just really try and understand what the MSP is trying to achieve, or actually whether they're just window shopping at this moment in time. And this might be a project for 2026 and beyond that they want to look for. I think as soon as you try and level with a person to see exactly where they're at and what they're looking for, then that's a quick way of finding some mutual ground and so on. I think that the question could be bounced straight back to you, Richard. When you were an MSP, which vendors did you find easiest to work with and why? And I guess why was that? Because you will have had cold calls from vendors that you just didn't entertain, and you'll have
yeah.
had vendors that you were actively seeking to work with. So where was the kind of differentiator between those?
It's very much what you say that if we felt as though the vendor and specifically the account executive had our best interest at heart, just like we
Mhm.
said about MSPs and clients, we went deep on that relationship then. And what I mean by that is once we'd built that relationship, once we realized, hey, we want to grow together, we would actually say, and this is a perhaps a lesson or a heads up for MSPs listening, that if you've got somebody like Kristian who, as your account executive, who's really good at what he does and wants to help you grow your business, ask them how you can help them. So I would have asked you back in the day, Kristian, like, I'm loving this relationship. It's going really well. How can we help you to succeed? And I know
Yeah.
from being an MSP that some of the things that you perhaps are measured or bonused on, it's not necessarily just the number of licenses you sell. It might be things like, oh, new partners bringing on board or getting engineers certified within qualifications for the vendor, that type of thing. So we made a commitment the other way back. So I hope, that's not going too deep on what you asked because the stuff that turns you off, which is when the vendor salesperson says, oh, let me sell you on A, B, C, and D. And by the way, can you make a decision before the 28th? And what they're really saying is because that's when my deadline hits. That's nothing to do with me. And the
Yeah.
flip side of the coin is what you've been talking about, which is nurturing and helping people to grow together. But once we had that relationship, we would go deep on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the elephant in the room is salespeople get paid commission on what you purchase from them. But the great thing, what I love about this MSP channel in a way is if you sell it as an MSP and you profit from it and you can see the cybersecurity posture of your clients increasing and they're more secure and you're making more profit from those types of solutions, if you're succeeding, then so am I. And that
Yeah.
is really a mutually beneficial relationship. And to your point there, I've never been an MSP myself, Richard. but I have worked with thousands of them, if not tens of thousands of them. And I can see what maybe the more successful ones have done in a pattern and versus the ones that have maybe struggled a little bit and the patterns that they follow as well. So I can
Yeah.
definitely give advice based on the sheer volume of conversations that we have here.
I think it's super relevant as well. So I'm asking questions here about the relationship between the MSP and the vendor. But for anybody paying attention, this absolutely parallels the relationship between the MSP and the client. And so any questions that we're asking about the vendor MSP relationship, clients are asking about their relationship with you. So let me ask you to be as objective as you possibly can, even though you're working for the awesome Huntress here. If an MSP is considering partnering with a vendor like Huntress, what should they look for beyond just price and features?
It's difficult to be objective because there's
Yeah.
2 points that I would make here. But one is, what do they give back? You've mentioned community, you've mentioned the amazing Tracy there as well as that community leader. But where do they sit within the community? What do they do for free? What do they do that isn't monetized?
Yeah.
What advice do they give? And so on. The number one thing for me though, Richard, is can I get my hands on the product before I buy it? And
Mm,
can I test it? Can I trial it? Can I have a not for resale? Can I just play with it for a bit before I buy it? Because it always strikes me as difficult to plunge into. Some of these agreements can be long term for thousands of pounds, and you've not even touched the product. Maybe you've seen a demonstration of. So for me, I think those two things are really important. Where they sit in terms of the community, what they give back to the MSP channel, and where they sit in terms of openness around the product and
yeah.
capability to use that and trial it and see whether it's a match or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to change tact a little bit here. We alluded to it right at the start. You and I are on video as well as doing the audio podcast here, having a conversation. I really appreciate that. You're putting yourself out there. You've really embraced video as a way of connecting with people. I was complimenting you just before we came on air. I said, I've been watching your videos for a while. You're absolutely rocking it. What got you started with video? Because there's a lot of people watching or listening to this, enjoying the conversation, but oh, these guys are naturals. They've done it forever or whatever. That's absolutely not the case. How
Yeah.
did you get started in it?
I've been a kind of long-term LinkedIn surfer for a long time, and those people are vast in numbers, by the way, that will look at videos and not comment, not or share or
Yeah.
engage with it, but they viewed it. And you'll know this yourself when you get your kind of weekly update on the figures around the videos that you've produced. There's thousands of people that have viewed it for thousands of minutes or hours, and then you might get 2 likes at the end of that, and it moves
Yeah.
on. Now, maybe that says something about my content, Richard. I don't know,
Not
but
at all.
uh,
Forgive me for interrupting there. I want to share one thing as a content creator that I'd learned over 20 years. And it was my great mentor, Arlen Sorensen, who taught me this when I first started out doing it. He said, Richard, for every one person who puts their hand up and says thank you, and of course, fast forward today, that might be a like or maybe a comment. He said, there's 100 other people who feel that way but will never ever express their gratitude or it's so I absolutely agree. We can get hundreds, thousands of views, very little actual feedback or comments. Doesn't mean the content
yeah.
is not impacting, does it? So it's not just
No,
you.
absolutely. No, and I'm fairly new to this myself. And a short story, I joined a call with an MSP in the Netherlands last week, and it was a rather odd phraseology, but he said, Kristian, good to see you again. I wake up to you every morning. I thought, beg your pardon?
Yeah.
And he said, no, I'd see your LinkedIn videos. And I thought, well, maybe throw one a like occasionally or something. But actually, even in the few months that I've been doing this, I've quickly come to the point where I actually don't care about the engagement too much. It's a bit of an itch that I wanted to scratch. And to the initial question, I've been thinking about doing videos for a long period of time. And I don't know what it was, but one day I just thought, yeah, I maybe people do care about what I've got to say, or maybe I can give some value back to people watching. And I've got to say, as soon as I put the first video on there, Nick O'Donovan, my line manager, shared it amongst the staff here, and
Oh,
it was on internal Slack channels, and he messaged you, and it was the support I had in doing that was really great. So I think just go for it. I've had a lot of messages, similar questions, Richard, of how is it? What do you do? I've wanted to do it, but I've never really had the bravery. Just go for it, because once you've got over the initial, what am I doing on camera? I need a tan. I need Botox. I need them bottom teeth, need a brace on them. What is that Stoke-on-Trent accent? After a while, you just become comfortable with it. And I think I enjoy it as the main thing, I think, Richard.
Absolutely. I was in the studio last week with one of my great friends, Scott Riley. We were doing a TubbTalk episode that may have been released by the time this goes out. And we were talking about overcoming that fear. And I said, I have got the stereotypical face for radio here. And yet I've still done it for 20 years. So there's no excuse for anybody there. But joking aside, being self-depreciating there is a mindset shift that you have to go into. You've shared some of the things. Is there anything else specific that you've realized looking back now that it's, oh, I just needed to get over myself to do that? Any mindset shifts?
Yeah, I think people do care what you say. I think there's a lot of stuff on LinkedIn that is actually just waffle, and nobody's negative or critical of that. They just move on. And there's other stuff on there, yourself included. There's a number of MSP owners as well now, which is fantastic to see, that are putting videos out there. There's a couple I've seen recently debunking IT myths and debunking, getting into the acronyms behind IT as well and explaining those. And I think they are really valuable, even for people in the industry. Sales in particular, though, is one of those practices that you have to keep coming back to the basics. I mentioned my wife's a dance teacher. Ballerinas will constantly do the same exercises that go back to real basic stuff that they might learn when they're 5 or 6. Yeah. But I think sales is constantly one of those industries where you can strip back to basics. You might go on a sales training course and learn stuff that you learned 5 years ago, but you've not been putting into practice. And I got some advice a couple of years ago, which was do what and actually put into practice what you've learned and do what you know is right. And some of my videos are quite funny. I think they are. But they can be completely away from sales altogether. Some of them might be sales related, some of them might be cybersecurity related. But I like to think that there's some value for anyone really watching them, or some entertainment at least. Yeah, I think just do it. I think it would be my advice. Just go for it. What's the worst that can happen?
What's the worst that can happen? And how have MSPs responded to your videos, Kristian? Has there been any surprising feedback or success stories that you can share with us? You mentioned one of your clients across there in the Netherlands who said, watch your videos all the time, wake up with you. Love that. Yeah. Any other type feedback?
Yeah, I've actually, in honesty, I've got some sales leads from that as well as potential conversations with MSPs that have come from that. Now, although that wasn't my intention when I started, I can see why that would be a kind of natural progression, because people buy from people that they know and trust. And I think if you can put yourself out there, Richard, you and I have met once briefly for 10 minutes at a convention a few years ago, but I already know from the content that I know and trust you. And I think that can be said for multiple kind of content creators on any platform, really, especially LinkedIn. And my advice to any managed service providers would be, get yourself out there, because you never know what might come back from it. So yeah, I've had some really positive feedback. I think the industry in general is really positive, and few people tend to complain. If they do, it's on Reddit somewhere. But to few people, West, yeah, exactly, yeah, the rabbit hole. But there we go. Yeah, it's been really positive for me to go through that process, and the MSP community have been really fantastic with feedback as well.
Yeah, so you clearly see video as a huge opportunity for MSPs to get themselves out there, to build that know and trust. What advice would you give to people on starting? Because I know, let's touch upon this. There's lots of MSPs we've said who are like myself, historically, technically driven. They might be thinking, oh, I've got to get the right kit here. I've got to get this video, this microphone, whatever. I suspect that's not the way forward. Is it? Is it more about the mindset and just deciding you're going to do it rather than all the cool kit?
100%. Yeah. I'm in an office, which is a kind of converted garage at the back of my house right now. I've got an iPhone, which I record my videos on. I've got a 15 quid ring light from Amazon and a headset from an old employer. And that's not even what I used to get started. When I first started my first video, I just had the phone, and that was it. And I started to just talk and see how it went. And actually, my colleague, actually, Sasha Roshan, is producing some phenomenal content on
I wanted
LinkedIn.
to give Sasha a shout out because
Yeah,
we featured him on some of my own videos. And Huntress are really curating this legion of content creators who are doing great things and leading the way. Yourself and Sasha being in amongst there. But yeah, great shout out for Sasha there.
he's far more technical than me, which is not difficult because I got an E grade in GCSE IT, Richard.
Oh,
But
you
he's
shouldn't admit that. You shouldn't admit that publicly in front of this audience. So.
I lost the coursework, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But Sasha has gone the whole other way. He's recommending things to buy, kit, and so on. And I think you can spend thousands of pounds on video editing software as well. So the way I do this is I've got an iPhone, and I think I use a free app that enables me to add captions. That's it. That's pretty much all I post up onto LinkedIn. Maybe that might change as things go on. I don't know, but don't procrastinate with trying to get the right kit, because ultimately, I don't think you might agree here, it will never be perfect.
No.
And that's why people watch you, right? If they wanted perfect, they might go and watch something else.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Just get on and do it. Don't worry
do
about
it.
the kit. And I learned from my great friend, the illustrious leader of the tech tribe, Nigel Moore. We were talking about video, and Nigel, like me, techie geek, perhaps a little bit awkward about putting themselves in front of the camera. And what Nigel did, Kristian, was every person who joined, every MSP who joined the tech tribe, he recorded a video for them. Bonjoro, I think, was the app he used, just saying, "Hey, Nigel here, welcome to the tech tribe." And after he'd done 5,000 of those, it became second nature. Now, I'm not saying you have to have that many repetitions, but you were saying about your wife's dance school and the ballerinas doing the same thing. And it is about consistency, about repetition, just doing it. And then before
Absolutely.
you get to a stage where it's second nature and you're having a conversation with the camera rather than thinking it's a big deal.
Absolutely. How many Zoom calls have you ever been on, Richard?
Oh my
Or
goodness.
Teams
Probably not as
calls?
many as you, but yeah, thousands.
Ah,
So yeah.
hundreds of thousands, I think.
Yeah.
And that's exactly that. You sat in front of a camera, looking at yourself half the time, looking at other people the other half of the time. So
Yeah.
I think people are far closer to content creation than they might think
Yeah.
already by having these conversations and FaceTime calls and WhatsApp video calls and so on. So for a lot of people, it's not that far away. Just do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, great advice. Now, if you're listening to this while you're out walking the dog or in the car or whatever, and of course, we're giving lots of links here to Kristian's videos, Sasha's videos, my own stuff. Please don't worry about remembering any of this. We'll put everything into the show notes on TubbLog, the hub for MSPs. So we've got you back on that one. But Kristian, we've talked about video. Obviously, it's a huge thing now. The overwhelming advice is MSP owners, just get out there and actually do it. Let's return to more traditional sales again, although the two are merging. But if you could give MSP owners one piece of sales advice to focus on for the remainder of this year, what would you say it should be?
Focus on solving problems rather than selling units. I
Okay.
think that would be my advice. And I think it's really easy to in this industry to be maybe distracted by a new toy, a new product, a new shiny thing that has just been launched that you might want to introduce to maybe one or two clients along the way. But I'd look at the broadest breadth of your client base and look for similar challenges and look to solve as many of those as you possibly could. Often that leads to a sale, that leads to a new piece of software maybe, or a new service package that you might provide to them. But if you're ultimately solving the client's problems, it's going to make their life easier. It's going to make them more able to grow. And as you rightly say, the conversations we have between vendor and MSP are almost a mirror image of the conversations that happen between MSP and client. So if we can start to solve those problems, that would be my advice for the rest of this year and beyond. Solve the problem.
I'm intrigued. You said earlier I'm a natural pessimist, Kristian. Like, it's clear for anybody watching this, listening to this, your enthusiasm spilling over, your excitement for what you do. So I'd perhaps disagree with you on the pessimism thing. You come across really optimistic and really bubbly. What's the best part of your job at Huntress? What gets you excited every day? What do you jump out of bed to do?
I'm a people person, and
Yeah.
meeting new people is absolutely what I enjoy the most about Huntress, about the MSP community, and understanding what they do and how they do things. It's really interesting actually to peek behind the curtain of different businesses and offer advice around that. So definitely the people I work with as well. As you mentioned, we've got a phenomenal team, especially in Europe at Huntress. And I think that's definitely the best thing about my day-to-day job is the people. I always say the difference between a good day and a bad day is you've just met different people, really. It's very rare that you get something that's wrong on a technical level, power cut aside or something along those lines. But often it's people that make or break your day, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, talking of people, I think from my observation of knowing you in the short time I've known you, you've grown a lot since you've been putting yourself out there on video and doing these things and being with Huntress. What's something you've learned about yourself since you've been doing that that perhaps you didn't know before?
I think that I've constantly looked for some form of justification for me to share my ideas. And for I've always thought people won't care what you say, Kristian. They won't find any value in what you say. But actually, the feedback that I've had is maybe that's not necessarily the case. And maybe
Yeah,
one or two people can find some value in what I say or can think, oh, that's quite an interesting way of phrasing something or of explaining something. I think what I found over the time in MSP land, if you will, is that everyone's got different strengths. And I say I've got an E in IT at GCSE level with pride, because actually I think that's a superpower in a way that I'm able to explain what can be quite complicated technical information in layman's terms. And that's what
yeah.
I do a lot in my videos is try and explain it to someone, my nan, maybe, who wouldn't understand. And there's a great piece of advice. I think it was from Steve Jobs, wasn't it, who said he needed to be able to explain something to an 8-year-old in order to be able to truly understand it. I've
Yeah.
got an 8-year-old, and the other day we were walking to school and he asked me what EDR was. So if you can try and explain EDR to an 8-year-old, then you're on the right tracks, I think, in this industry, because it was a long conversation, put it that way.
Well, you've mentioned your 8-year-old, you mentioned your wife and her background in the dance school and everything. Who is Kristian Walker when he's not on camera, when he's not working at Huntress? Who are you outside of work?
Oh, I got asked that the other day by a colleague. And what do you do in your spare time? I've got 3 kids, Richard, so I don't have any spare time. That's the answer. I'm a dad, really, and I spend my time ferrying children from club to club. I've got 2 boys and one almost 1-year-old daughter. So
Ah,
I'm very busy in that aspect. Maybe I might put on a TV program when they've all gone to bed at night, or maybe I might just creep the laptop open and carry on with a bit of work. But there's not a lot of time for anything else. I'm sure there's a lot of parents listening to me say that go, yeah, and that's okay that I'm not playing football or running or going to the gym or hiking or it's just a period of your life where you're just dad for a little bit, I think.
I would agree. I've got 2 stepsons. They're 18 and 21. My wife, Claire, and I were just discussing they're just about, or one of them's moved out this past weekend. The other one's just about to move out to go to university. It's a completely different phase of your life. And when earlier on, yeah, it's just about being a taxi, ferrying people around and that. I'm so glad you answered that rather than I like to climb mountains and
I know.
skydiving, which is all very cool. But sometimes when I ask that question to people and they respond that way, and I'm like, where on earth do you find the time to do
I
this if you're just
know.
having a family?
And you
Yeah,
say that they're just about to move out. My head goes, what is he going to do with all
yeah,
this time?
yeah.
Like he's gonna have to find a hobby now, Richard, I think. But yeah, I've got a few
And
years to go yet.
I've mentioned some of my mentors. You've mentioned Nick O'Donovan. We've mentioned Tracy Arisco. People have been an influence on you. Who else, looking back on your journey and you're just developing into this content creator, building a reputation for it, who has helped you get to this stage? And is there anybody you would give a shout out to?
We've already mentioned Sasha. He's been really supportive in terms of tips and tricks and what to look out for. I've got to say, there's a lot of stuff on LinkedIn that helps you go and find this, right? And from a sales perspective as well, if you're following the right people, there's a lot of tips and tricks and processes maybe that you can go through that will elevate your level. In terms of sales managers over the past, I think I've got a little bit of all of them that I've had in the past. So Steve Clark was my sales manager at Datto. He was a phenomenal influence on me. I worked for a company called Overclockers a while ago. Simon Gilby was my sales manager there. And in his whole process, he was the first real salesperson that I met that I thought, he's a pro and he's maybe done this for 30 years and he's worked at the places like Dell and HP and Computer Center over time. And there was a lot of advice passed on from Simon to me as well. So I think as you get to a point in your career, maybe where you've done it for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years plus, you start to look back and say, oh, I got that from this person and I got this from that person. And you start to become a kind of Frankenstein of all of the influences that you've had on you over the time as well.
Yeah, yeah. And do you ever look outside the MSP industry? Are there content creators from other industries, marketing, sales, that type of thing that you're following? Or
Not necessarily on the sales side of things, Richard,
yeah,
actually. I think I try and switch off from sales outside of sales if I can. And I watch the odd video on LinkedIn here and there. Other podcasts that I might listen to, mainly based around football, I think. But even that industry has moved into an ex-football player can just create their own podcast all of a sudden and
yeah,
have guests on there and they become a content creator themselves. And I think if that's not an advertisement in just doing it, build it and they will come,
yeah.
then I don't know what is.
And who's your football team?
I'm a Manchester United fan, unfortunately, Richard.
Manchester United. We will end the conversation there then.
Yeah, thanks. Been nice knowing you.
Challenging period of time to be a Manchester United fan at the moment, I would guess.
Yeah, absolutely. But then we have to go through some challenge because I was born in 1991. So for the first 12, 22 years of my life, I only knew success really. And then a gentleman called Sir Alex Ferguson left the club, and things haven't quite been the same ever since. But there we go. Yeah, definitely. Are you a football man yourself, Richard?
Not so much anymore. Obviously I live in Newcastle upon Tyne, but originally from Birmingham. I'm an Aston Villa fan, and like you, I was born during a period where Villa won the European Cup
Yeah,
'82 and all that. So I knew, and not quite the same now. Although Villa are in ascension now, I would say,
yeah.
or certainly were last season. But yeah, not so much with the football anymore. Yeah.
So this is what I've got to look forward to then. The glory days have gone, and it's maybe decades of nothing really to look forward
No,
to.
I wouldn't put it. There's that pessimism coming out there again. You want to focus on what could happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kristian, this has been a real thrill for me to have this conversation. When Nick O'Donovan at Huntress brought your work to my attention, I followed it. I think you're doing amazing things. The reason it's been such a thrill for me, I feel like an old man here, but I've been doing this for 20 odd years. And when I started out, it was rare. Not many people were doing in the MSP industry, doing social media, podcast, video, blogging, all those sort of things. And I see a lot of that excitement in what you're doing. And I'd encourage you to keep with that because you are making a difference, not just to your work with Huntress and in the sales situation. You're obviously raising Huntress's reputation within the industry, but you are genuinely helping MSPs to overcome their reluctance to do video and get out there as well. So I wish you all the best with it. And thank you for what
Thank
you're
you.
doing for the industry. I think you're absolutely rocking it. So
Thanks very much, Richard. Thanks so much for the kind feedback. I'll take it
yeah.
rather embarrassingly, I think, but I'll take
Not at
that.
all. I've made you go red there, but my pleasure. And I guess I mentioned earlier on, if anybody's not aware of Kristian's videos or Sasha's videos or any of the work of Huntress, we'll include links in the show notes. But if anybody wants to reach out and continue the conversation with you, Kristian, what's the best platform for them to find you on?
For me, LinkedIn would be the best platform, absolutely.
Yeah.
The only platform that I actually produce any
Yeah,
kind of videos for, because it is for MSPs, and I think that's where they tend to hang out most, I think.
I would agree. Yeah, yeah,
It
absolutely.
seems to be LinkedIn, the only social media platform where it's socially acceptable to be on whilst you're at work. And I think that's why it does that. But I know that Sasha will have YouTube and TikTok
Yeah.
and all sorts. And I'm not there yet, but LinkedIn definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. You're doing great work. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. So, Kristian Walker, wish you all the best in the future. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks so much, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.